Hello and welcome to IBTimes TV. I'm Leanna Brinder, Business Editor for the International Business Times. Joining me now is Paul Dennis. He's a Senior Director at CEB. So hi Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So let's talk budget cuts 2014. So CFOs across all companies, all sectors, are now these days expected to do more for less. What would you say are the main ways in which CFOs can tackle this problem?
So looking predominantly at the expectation on the finance function, we've seen that the finance budget for providing not only strong internal controls, but also better business guidance has been reducing steadily year on year. In fact, our data has shown that since 2009, in the average department, the finance function budget is 25% less now. So absolutely, there's a big pressure on CFOs to be doing more with less. And many CFOs are turning towards transforming their functions, actually trying to become much more efficient so that they can provide a similar level of service at a much lower cost. Interestingly, however, those that pursue that direction are being less successful than CFOs that make bets and understand more precisely the relative value of the different activities that they do. And so you'll see some CFOs make a decision actually to stop doing things and just do fewer things better. And that's actually a much better recipe for success than simply trying to do more with less year on year.
But surely with all the regulatory changes across the globe, the costs in terms of staying compliant is going to be felt by everyone. How can CFOs balance that?
It's probably the single biggest challenge that any CFO faces, which is balancing the need for strong controls and strong governance with an increased demand in business guidance. If you think about the risks that most companies face, 5-10 years ago, actually the risks to a company going out of business were more likely to be driven by changes in the regulatory environment or by, quite frankly, corporate scandals. If you look interestingly at the number of companies that have gone bankrupt or have disappeared in the past few years, however, it's not normally been the regulatory environment that has caused that. It's been because they've failed to connect with the changing patterns of their customers, or they failed to react to competitors coming into their space. And so actually as the risk spectrum changes, so too does the way in which finance needs to think about its resources. It's not simply that the risks are going to come from regulatory bodies anymore. Actually, a lot of those risks come from just not seeing what your customers are telling you and not hearing what your customers are telling you on a daily basis.
Well, we've evolved again in terms of the financial landscape, and first of all we had the credit crisis, then we had people who failed to adapt to the changes in the markets, and now we have new regulations. So stemming from that, we all know that we're going to have regulatory changes across the globe. What are you seeing in terms of the biggest no-nos in terms of companies managing long-term risks? Companies
will always make bad decisions. The trick is, if you make no decisions at all, you tend to go nowhere. The trick is to, if you're going to make a bad decision, is to recognize it quickly and to correct and move on. And we see that actually stifling innovation, stifling that sort of level of decision making or decision inertia can do sometimes even more damage than making a bad decision. And as long as you don't make it twice, typically you can move on. One of the big no-nos, I would say, just from the work that we've done with CFOs, is getting the balance wrong between investing in controls and investing in growth. And actually, there are a few things that can keep CFOs up at night right now, but one of them is the expectations, often from the analysts or from the investment community, for their continued growth in a market that isn't moving as fast as many people would like, given the targets that these companies have set for themselves. And to hit a growth target in this environment, you need to take some risk, you need to be comfortable taking risk, and you need to correct any bad decisions quickly. But simply not taking any risk is non-negotiable at the CFO level. And so probably the big no is either taking far too much risk without having the structure in place to correct, or taking no risk at all. Getting that balance right is the hard thing. And I suppose the linchpin now to exactly what you said is the emerging markets. I mean, in previous years, emerging markets has always been the beacon for growth.
that's the first place that people will go to in terms of expanding their business. But over the last couple of months, there's been an emerging market sell-off as people want to shy away from, I suppose, more riskier regions. How are you seeing companies plough time, money, resources into these areas now?
4 or 5 years ago, when the US and Western Europe was in a state of no growth, we saw a huge movement towards emerging markets, and that was seen as the next source of growth. Now it's a little bit more of a level playing field, and with the right product and the right structure and the right company, you can still achieve quite good results in the core markets that you know better. Companies that tend to do well in emerging markets are companies that have the right right capabilities to succeed in greater levels of complexity. Their people probably have more general skill sets. Their knowledge of the local markets is going to be greater, and they have very carefully formed alliances or even joint ventures. Companies that simply try and lift their product from one market and move it to another tend to be the ones that struggle more. And so it's actually about getting the balance right and figuring out which is the right market for your product. And we've seen many companies actually realize that no, there's still quite a bit of growth potential in our core markets if we get after them in a slightly more structured or slightly more focused way.
Well, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure, thank you.
That was Paul Dennis. He's the Senior Director at CEB.